He paid just $1 for the virgin bride, but when the cowboy knelt in Heartbreak, she broke down in tears. There were no singing oceans or glowing forests. Caldera 9 was dry, dusty, and honest. Two suns rose every morning, painting the land in pale gold and burnt orange. Wind moved slowly across the plains, carrying the smell of iron soil and old grass. Machines hummed far apart from each other, spaced out like lonely thoughts. This was a place for people who wanted quiet, or people who had nowhere else to go. Elias Ward had come for both reasons. He lived alone on a small ranch at the edge of the settlement zone. The house was old, built by hand with metal plates and stone blocks. The power generator complained loudly at night and the water recycler leaked when it rained. Elias fixed both himself. He always fixed things himself. Once, years ago, Elias had been a spacer. He had worn a uniform, followed orders, and traveled between stars. He had seen things most people never wanted to imagine. When his service ended, he did not ask for medals or money. He asked for distance. So he came to Caldera 9, bought cheap land, and lived a simple life. He raised long-horned grazer beasts, repaired broken machines for neighbors, and kept mostly to himself. Elias did not think much about the galaxy anymore, until the exchange appeared on his terminal. The Galactic Settlement Exchange was a legal system used by frontier worlds. It handled debts, contracts, labor bonds, and sometimes marriage agreements. Elias usually ignored it. The exchange was cold, clean, and cruel in a polite way. But that morning, one listing caught his eye. It was not the price. It was not the title. It was the description. Status: untouched legal entity. It meant Saren Ale had never been bound to any family, house, corporation, or ruling body. She had never signed away her future. She was, in the eyes of the law, unused. The word made Elias uncomfortable. He opened the file. Saren Ale was from a high-gravity water world near the inner roots. Her people were old, proud, and deeply political. According to the file, her ruling council had fallen. The new leaders were erasing old bloodlines to secure power. Saren had one escape option left: ancient law. If an untouched citizen received a legal binding contract from outside the system, even the smallest one, the council could not imprison or alter them. The contract did not have to be kind. It just had to exist. Elias stared at the screen for a long time. Others had already seen the listing. He could tell by the quiet interest markers. Wealthy bidders would arrive soon, people who saw contracts as tools, people who would bind Saren Ale tightly and call it mercy. Elias exhaled slowly. He was not rich. He was not powerful. And he did not want a bride, but he hated systems that treated people like cargo. He opened the bid panel. The exchange asked him to confirm the amount. 1 credit. 1 credit was almost nothing. It was less than a cup of synthetic coffee in the city. Less than a bolt for his tractor. His finger hovered. "This won't change anything," he muttered. Then he thought of the word untouched. He pressed confirm. The terminal chimed softly. Bid accepted. Elias froze. He stared at the screen, sure it had to be a mistake. But the confirmation line remained. Legal binding contract established. His heart thudded once, heavy and slow. "No," he whispered, "that's not right." Other bids should have come in, someone with more money, someone with more interest, but the exchange was strict. Saren's law demanded the lowest valid offer be accepted first. Elias Ward had just one. Within minutes, his terminal lit up with notifications, messages from officials, from traders, from people who suddenly cared. The settlement office sent a short, sharp notice. Subject will arrive in 48 standard HOURS. Compliance required. Elias stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "Damn it," he said softly. He paced the small room. Dust fell from the ceiling as the house adjusted to the wind. Outside, one of the grazers lowed lazily. Elias rubbed his face. He had not planned this. He had not wanted this. but the galaxy had a habit of turning quiet decisions into loud consequences. 2 days later, a transport ship descended near the settlement pad. It was smooth, white, and far too elegant for Caldera 9. People gathered to watch. Whispers spread quickly. A human rancher, a dollar contract, an alien bride. Elias stayed back, standing near his old truck. His hands were in his pockets. His shoulders were tense. The ramp lowered. Saren Ale stepped into the light. She was taller than Elias expected, with skin that shimmered faintly like moonlit water. Her eyes were large and dark, reflecting the twin suns. She wore simple travel robes, but her posture was controlled, careful. She looked around, alert and ready. This was not a woman expecting kindness. An official approached her and spoke quickly. Saren nodded once. Then her gaze moved until it landed on Elias. The official pointed. Saren walked toward him. Each step was measured, calm, but Elias noticed her hands were clenched. When she stopped in front of him, there was silence. "You are Elias Ward," she said. Her voice was smooth but cautious. "Yes," he answered. She studied his clothes, his worn boots, the dust on his jacket. This was not what she had expected either. "You placed the bid," she said. "Yes, for 1 credit. Yes." Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted. "Do you understand what that means?" she asked. Elias swallowed. "It means the law says you had to come here," he said, "and it says I'm responsible for your safety." "And ownership," she added. He shook his head immediately. "No," he said, "not ownership." She blinked, confused. "That is how contracts work." "Not this one," Elias replied. "Not the way I see it." The officials watched closely. They expected instructions, commands, terms. Elias took a breath. "You're free to stay or leave," he said, loud enough for the recorders to hear. "I won't stop you. I won't force anything. This contract exists to protect you from them, not to trap you here." Saren stared at him. No one had ever said that to her before. The officials exchanged looks. One cleared his throat. "Legally," the official said, "the contract binds her residence to your registered land." Elias nodded. "Then she can stay as a guest," he said. "Nothing more." Saren's control finally cracked just a little. "Why?" she asked quietly. Elias met her eyes. "Because some things shouldn't be bought," he said, "even for 1 credit." The transport engines powered down. The crowd slowly dispersed, disappointed by the lack of drama. But Saren Ale remained standing in front of a human who had broken every expectation she carried. The galaxy had laughed at the dollar contract. It did not yet understand what kind of species would use a system meant for control to create something else entirely. And Elias Ward, quiet cowboy of a forgotten world, had no idea that this small, stubborn choice had just begun to change everything. The twin suns of Caldera 9 rose slowly over the horizon, bathing Elias Ward's ranch in pale gold light. Dust swirled lazily across the empty plains, and the long-horned grazers moved slowly, their heads bent to the dry grass. Elias stood on the porch, looking out over the land. His thoughts were tangled. Saren Ale was inside the house now, unpacking her small bag from the transport ship. She moved with careful precision, examining each corner, as if the walls themselves might be alive. Elias did not interfere. He had learned long ago that humans, most humans, were defined not by their words, but by the respect they gave to others' choices. That principle extended to anyone, even an alien from a faraway world. Saren came out a few hours later, carrying a small tray of steaming tea. The fragrance was unfamiliar to Elias, earthy and strong but comforting. She held it carefully as if it were fragile and approached him. "You drink this?" she asked quietly. Elias smiled faintly. "I do now." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the wind hum through the old windmill outside. It squeaked with every gust, a sound Elias had come to think of as part of the ranch's voice. "Why are you doing this?" Saren asked, finally. Her voice was steady, but Elias noticed the faint tremor underneath. "Doing what?" he asked. letting me stay, not claiming me, not controlling me. Elias put the mug down on the railing. He looked at her with calm eyes, steady and clear, because no one should be owned. Not by law, not by duty, not by a contract. Saren raised an eyebrow. Even if it means you lose everything, Elias shrugged. If doing the right thing costs me everything, then I still keep what matters most. Saren did not answer. Instead, she studied him, trying to understand this strange human who would refuse power when it was offered. In the galaxy she had known, species measured worth in strength, wealth, and control. Humans were considered reckless, naive, and emotional. Elias was proof that at least some humans were all three, but in ways that were also admirable. The days passed slowly. Elias went about his work on the ranch, repairing machines, feeding grazers, and tending to the small vegetable patch that struggled in the dry soil. Saren followed him at a distance, observing. At first she only watched. She asked few questions and spoke even less. But humans, Elias knew, had a patience born from hard lives. They did not rush others. They allowed understanding to grow naturally. One afternoon, Saren finally spoke while he was repairing the generator. "Why do you do all this yourself?" she asked. Elias wiped his hands on a rag. "Because no machine is too big to fix, no problem too small to solve. And because no one else will do it for me exactly the way it should be done." Saren frowned slightly. "It seems exhausting." "It is," he said with a quiet laugh. "But it also makes the land feel alive. If I leave it to others, it loses its voice. Like people. If you do everything for them, they stop speaking." Saren tilted her head. She had never thought of people in that way. Most species considered others tools to be used or creatures to be managed. Elias' perspective was simple, yet strange and powerful. Over the next week, Saren began helping him in small ways, carrying tools, gathering water, feeding the grazers. Elias never asked her to do anything, never commanded her, and never praised her. She realized she was learning simply because she wanted to, not because she had to. The villagers from the small settlement nearby began to whisper about the dollar contract. Some laughed, some shook their heads, others were curious. A few came to watch the alien girl at the human ranch, expecting conflict, expecting drama, but they found none. Instead, they saw Elias speaking to Saren as if she were a person, not a prize. They saw her learning to ride a grazer, trying to repair a broken irrigation pipe, and laughing at small failures. And slowly, the villagers began to understand that this human, in his quiet stubbornness, was different from what the galaxy said humans were. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon and the sky turned pink and orange, Saren finally spoke at length. She had been silent for days, gathering her courage. "I have never met a human like you," she said. "One who refuses power, one who refuses money, one who refuses ownership. Most humans are like fire, quick, loud, dangerous." Elias chuckled softly. "Some are, but not all." Saren's gaze moved over the land, the grazers, the simple buildings. "I do not understand it. Why do you care so much about doing the right thing, even when it does not help you?" Elias considered this. He leaned against the railing. "Because some things are bigger than survival. Bigger than law, bigger than rules, bigger than fear. If you cannot protect someone's choice, then what kind of life is worth living?" Saren did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at him and saw something she had never seen in her people, a human capable of true moral courage. In the days that followed, a subtle bond began to form. It was not love, not yet. It was something quieter, stronger, respect, trust. A shared understanding that the choices they made mattered more than the galaxy's rules. Then one morning, an unexpected message arrived from the Galactic Council. It was not a threat, not a command. It was a warning. The contract is under review. Other bidders may intervene. You are advised to comply. Elias read the message and sighed. He had expected this. The galaxy did not like humans who refused its systems. Most species would have accepted wealth, status, or power without hesitation. Elias would not. He turned to Saren. "They will come," he said. "The council, the other bidders, they will try to take you back." Saren's eyes widened slightly. She had been afraid of many things in her life, but confrontation, direct threat. She had never imagined someone would risk themselves for her freedom. "They cannot make me do anything," she said. "Legally, I can refuse." Elias shook his head. "Legally, yes, but the galaxy has other ways: pressure, threats, persuasion. Some species do not care about law when it suits them." Saren studied him carefully. "You would risk yourself for me?" Elias smiled faintly, almost sadly. "I risk nothing to protect your freedom. I risk nothing to refuse ownership. The only thing I risk is the easy path, the path most would choose, and I am not most humans." For a long moment they stood silently, looking at the plains stretching into the horizon. The wind moved through the grass, and a lone grazer lowed somewhere far away. The world felt wide, dangerous, but alive. In that silence, Saren realized something important. Humans, she thought, were strange creatures. Reckless, emotional, stubborn, yes, but also capable of courage in the smallest, quietest ways. They could change a life with a simple choice. They could bend systems without violence, without power, without money. She thought of the dollar contract. What seemed like a cruel joke to the galaxy had become her shield, not because of the law, but because of one human willing to see beyond the rules. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," she said softly. Elias shrugged. "I told you. Not all humans are fire. Some of us are steady." Saren smiled faintly, a small curve of understanding and acceptance. She had come to Caldera 9 expecting rules, control, and confinement. Instead, she found choice, respect, and quiet courage. The week ended with no intervention from the galaxy. But that calm would not last. Saren's presence, the dollar contract, and Elias' refusal to submit had already drawn attention. Soon, outsiders would come, testing both law and morality. For now, however, the ranch was theirs. The sun set in twin bands of orange and red, casting long shadows over the dusty plains. Saren felt, perhaps for the first time, a small sense of peace. And Elias felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. The quiet hope that doing the right thing could, in the end, change more than just one life. On Caldera 9, in the middle of a galaxy that measured worth by control, humans, quiet, stubborn humans, were already beginning to rewrite the rules. The sun rose slowly over Caldera 9, painting the dry plains with gold and amber light. The long-horned grazers wandered lazily across the ranch, their heads bowed to the sparse grass. Elias Ward was already outside, tending to the fence line. His hands were rough and calloused from years of work, but his movements were careful, precise. Every plank, every wire, every post mattered. In a galaxy filled with machines and shortcuts, humans still valued effort. Saren Ale stood near the water pump, watching him. She had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of the ranch, the predictable work that required no alarms, no urgent messages, no judgment. She had also grown accustomed to Elias' presence, not controlling, not demanding, but quietly steady, like the land itself. Their calm routine, however, was about to change. A loud hum echoed across the plains. It was not the wind. It was not a grazer. The hum grew louder, vibrating the ground beneath their feet. Elias looked up first. In the distance, a fleet of sleek ships descended, cutting through the thin atmosphere like silver blades. They were not transporters or traders. These were official ships, marked with the emblem of the Galactic Council. Saren stiffened. She had expected interference, but not this fast. She had been told that the Council rarely acted quickly. Elias walked toward the fence, calm but alert. "Looks like our visitors have arrived," he said quietly. A hovercraft touched down near the main gate, kicking up dust. A squad of officials stepped out, their uniforms spotless, their movements precise. They carried no weapons, but their presence alone demanded attention. One of the officials, a tall, thin figure with sharp eyes, approached Elias. "Elias Ward," he said, his voice flat, controlled. "I am Counselor Raleigh's. We represent the Galactic Council. You have in your possession Saren Ale, a protected noble of the Elori people." Elias nodded slowly. "I am aware." "You have no right," the counselor continued, "to hold her here beyond the terms of the contract. She must be returned to the council immediately." Elias rested his hands on the fence. "The contract exists," he said quietly, "but it does not give you ownership. She is free to stay or leave." Counselor Raleigh's eyes narrowed. "Freedom is not your decision to grant. You are responsible for her residence under the law. Any interference will be considered illegal." Saren stepped forward, her voice steady. "I am not a property," she said clearly. "I choose to remain here." The counselor's gaze flicked to her, then back to Elias. "You are lucky she is not under the control of a more aggressive species," he said. "Most humans would not understand such liberty. But we will not allow this to continue. You must comply." Elias shook his head. "No." His voice was quiet, but it carried across the dusty plains. "I will not hand her over, not as property, not to satisfy a law that treats people like objects." Counselor Raleigh stepped closer. "You misunderstand. The council does not care about sentiment. You are violating protocol and the consequences could be severe." Elias sighed, wiping dust from his jacket. "I understand perfectly. I also understand that some rules are meant to protect people, not control them. And I will not allow anyone to take away that protection." Saren watched silently, realizing the courage it took for this human to defy the galaxy itself. No other species she knew would risk their standing, their reputation, or even their safety for someone else. Humans were reckless, yes, but Elias' recklessness was driven by something deeper: moral courage, stubbornness, and a refusal to accept injustice. The counselors exchanged glances. It was clear that Elias' calm defiance had unsettled them. Most species complied immediately when a council official demanded obedience. Most humans, they thought, were chaotic and unreliable. Elias was proving them wrong. One of the younger officials, hesitant but curious, asked, "Why do you resist?" "You have nothing to gain and everything to lose." Elias looked out over the plains. "I gain nothing because I do not seek to own anyone, but I lose everything if I accept injustice. The easy path is not always the right one." Saren felt a new respect for him rise inside her. Humans, she realized, had an ability to act morally even when no one was watching, even when the galaxy expected selfishness. They could change the outcome of events not through force, but through persistence, patience, and principle. Counselor Raleigh's voice hardened. "This is your final warning. You will comply or the council will take action." Elias did not flinch. He lowered his head, almost as if in quiet sorrow, and knelt before the counselor. The gesture shocked everyone. Kneeling was not surrender. It was an expression of deep, deliberate choice. "I will kneel," he said softly, "not to yield, but to show that I refuse to harm another for my benefit. Take her by law if you must, but I will never treat her as less than she is. And if that means I lose everything, I accept it." The counselors stared. This was not the response they had expected. Elias' quiet, unwavering defiance carried a weight that no law could measure. The act of kneeling, combined with his refusal to submit, revealed a principle the galaxy rarely encountered. Humans valued choice over compliance, ethics over convenience. Saren's eyes filled with tears, not of fear but of understanding. She realized that Elias was not risking a material loss. He was demonstrating something far greater. He was showing the galaxy what humanity truly could be: selfless, principled, and brave in the simplest way. The officials hesitated. They had dealt with stubborn humans before, but never like this. They had never faced someone willing to lose everything to uphold a moral truth. For a long moment, there was silence on the ranch. The wind whispered across the plains, carrying dust and the faint smell of grass. Even the grazers seemed to pause, sensing the tension. Then Saren stepped forward. "Enough," she said firmly. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had survived courts, councils, and political schemes. "I am free. I will remain here. Your threats mean nothing to me. This human has shown me respect, choice, and safety. I choose him not by contract but by my own will." Counselor Raleigh's jaw tightened. He had expected compliance, not courage. "You understand this may set a precedent," he said. Saren smiled faintly. "I understand. Let it be the right precedent." The counselors exchanged frustrated glances. They had never encountered a situation where a human and an alien worked together to resist control without violence, without threat, and without bribery. They had never seen the simple power of respect and moral courage. Finally, Raleigh's turned sharply and gestured to the other officials. "This is noted," he said, "but the Council will continue to monitor this planet. Any further violations will be addressed immediately." Without another word, they boarded their ships. The engines roared to life, lifting the sleek vessels off the dusty plains. Within moments, they were gone, leaving the ranch and the settlers behind. Saren looked at Elias, tears still glistening in her eyes. You risked everything," she whispered. Elias shook his head. "I risked nothing to protect freedom. That is all any human should do." For a long while, neither spoke. The twin suns dipped lower in the sky and the shadows stretched across the ranch. The dust settled, the grazers returned to their grazing, and the wind hummed softly through the fields. In that quiet moment, both human and alien understood something important. The galaxy had underestimated them. It had assumed humans would bend under pressure, that aliens would comply under law. But the truth was far simpler and far more powerful. Humans valued choice. They valued freedom. And when they acted on these principles, the universe itself had to notice. Saren wiped her tears and smiled at Elias. "I thought the galaxy would decide my fate," she said softly. "I did not know one human could change it instead." Elias returned her smile, quiet and steady. "Sometimes the smallest choices, one credit, one act of respect, can ripple farther than all the power in the galaxy. That is the strength of humanity." For the first time in her life, Saren felt completely safe. Not because the council had left, not because the law was on her side, but because she had met a human willing to stand for what was right, even when the galaxy expected him to bend. The plains stretched endlessly around them, and the twin suns set slowly. The dusk glowed gold in the dying light, and the grazers moved silently, leaving gentle marks in the soil. And in that quiet, steadfast calm, both Elias Ward and Saren Ale understood that something had changed. Not just their lives, but the way the galaxy would begin to see humans. They had survived the Council's pressure. They had defied expectation without raising a hand. And they had shown the galaxy that humans, quiet, stubborn, principled humans, were capable of courage that no law, no threat, and no force could ever take away. The future was uncertain, and the galaxy would continue to test them. But Elias and Saren were ready. Together, they had planted the first seeds of a truth that could not be ignored. Freedom and choice were worth more than all the stars. The wind on Caldera 9 was colder than usual that morning. The twin suns rose weak and pale over the dry plains, casting long shadows across the ranch. Elias Ward worked quietly, repairing a broken fence near the grazing grounds. His hands were steady, his movements precise, each nail driven into wood with care. Saren Ale watched him from the porch, her fingers wrapped around a mug of steaming tea. The events of the previous week weighed heavily on her mind. The council had come, threatened, and left, yet the tension lingered like dust in the air. She knew the galaxy would not forget. She knew it would try again, but what shook her the most was not fear. It was realization. Elias had risked everything, his land, his safety, his reputation, Not to gain power, not to claim her, but to protect her choice. She had never seen such courage. Such simple, steadfast morality. For a long time she stayed silent, drinking her tea, watching him work. She had learned much in the short time she had spent on the ranch. She had learned that humans valued honesty and effort, that they valued freedom, even when it cost them, that they could resist the galaxy itself without violence or force. And she had learned that Elias Ward was not like anyone she had ever met. She remembered the day she had arrived. She had expected a man who would follow law, a man who would claim his right, a man who would see her as a possession. Instead, she found patience, respect, and quiet strength. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of grazing beasts moving nearby. The sun caught their horns, turning them into glimmering arcs of light. The simplicity of life on the ranch was striking. It reminded her that freedom was not just a concept. It was lived, felt, and protected every day. Saren placed her mug down and walked toward the fence where Elias was working. "Why do you do this?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Elias looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Do what?" he asked. "Why do you protect me?" "Why risk yourself for someone you barely know?" Elias smiled faintly. "Because it is right. Because some things matter more than law, more than power, more than comfort. You are not property. You should never be treated as such. That is all the reason I need." Saren's gaze softened. She felt a warmth in her chest she had not expected, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and admiration. Her eyes blurred and a tear slid down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, ashamed at her own emotion. "Do you always see people this way?" she asked. "Not always," Elias admitted. "But when I do, I try to act. I do not wait for permission from the galaxy. I do not wait for law. I do what I believe is right, even if it costs me everything." Saren's tears began to flow more freely. She turned her face to the horizon, hoping he would not notice, but he did. "Saren," he said gently, "it is okay to feel. You do not have to hide it." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "I have never known anyone like you. Never. In all my life, no one has ever valued my choice over their own advantage. And you give it freely. Even now, even when the galaxy might return, even when you could lose everything." Elias set down his tools and walked toward her. He stood quietly, giving her space but offering presence. "You are not a prize," he said simply. "You are a person, and I will not let anyone, including me, treat you otherwise." Saren could not hold back her sobs any longer. She fell to her knees on the dusty ground, her hands covering her face. The tears ran freely, mixing with the dust at her feet. She had expected to feel fear, anger, or resentment on this lonely planet. She had never imagined she would feel such overwhelming relief. Elias knelt beside her, not touching her but close enough to offer quiet support. He said nothing. He did not need to. Sometimes, the presence of someone who would stand for you without question was enough to heal years of doubt and fear. After a long time, Saren lifted her head. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears, but her expression had changed. There was a new clarity, a new strength. "I thought I had no choice," she whispered. "I thought the galaxy decided my life. But you have shown me something I never imagined, that my choice matters, that I can stand even against everyone else." Elias reached out, offering a hand. "You have always had the choice," he said gently. "I am just here to make sure it remains yours. No one should take that away, not laws, not councils, not anyone." Saren took his hand, feeling the roughness of his palms, the firmness of his grip. In that simple touch she felt the weight of his promise, safety, respect, and freedom. She realized that freedom was not just the absence of force, it was the courage to act with integrity, even when the world demanded otherwise. You could have claimed me," she said, still holding his hand. "The contract allowed it." Elias shook his head. "That would have been easy, but easy is not always right. Humans have the capacity to be selfish, yes, but we also have the capacity to be better, to do the right thing, even when no one else will. That is what matters. Saren's tears returned, but this time they were different. They were tears of understanding, of respect, of hope. She realized that the galaxy, with all its rules and systems, could not define what it meant to be human. Humans had their own way, a stubborn, moral, and compassionate way, and Elia's ward was living proof. The wind shifted, carrying the dry smell of the plains and the faint scent of distant wildflowers. The grazers moved past, unbothered by the emotional storm unfolding nearby. Life went on, but for Saren, everything had changed. She stood slowly, still trembling, and looked at Elias. I choose to stay," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Not because of the contract, not because I am expected to. I stay because I want to, because you showed me what it means to be respected. What it means to be free." Elias' eyes softened. "And I am glad you choose. Freedom is only real when it is chosen, not given." The sun rose higher, warming the dusty plains. The ranch, simple and worn, seemed brighter than it had the day before. The events of the past days, the council's arrival, the threats, the pressure, had all been storms that tested their resolve. And now, in the quiet aftermath, something new had begun: trust, understanding, and the quiet foundation of partnership. Saren wiped her face and looked around the ranch. "This place, it is not like the worlds I have known," she said, "but I think I can call it home." Elias nodded, a small smile forming on his face. "It will be, if you want it to be. The land does not judge, and neither do I. You are free to stay or leave, but you are welcome here." For the first time in her life, Saren felt unshackled, not by law, not by council decree, not by politics, but by the simple, steadfast choice of one human being. The galaxy had assumed humans were reckless, selfish, and cruel. She had learned that humans could also be patient, brave, and moral in ways the galaxy could barely comprehend. Saren fell silent for a moment, feeling the weight of this realization. The tears had dried on her cheeks, leaving faint traces in the dust. She looked at Elias and spoke with quiet determination. "I will not forget this. I will not forget what you have shown me, and I will carry it with me wherever I go." Elias nodded again, understanding. That is all anyone can hope for. The twin suns climbed higher, scattering gold and amber across the plains. The ranch, the grazers, and the simple buildings basked in the light. Saren and Elias stood together, quiet and steady, knowing that the galaxy might challenge them again. But they also knew something more important. Their bond was built on trust, choice, and understanding, things no council, law, or force could ever take away. And in that moment, on the quiet, sunlit plains of Caldera 9, Saren Ale finally cried, not out of fear or sadness, but out of relief, gratitude, and the profound understanding that someone had truly seen her as a person, and not a possession. The galaxy had demanded its property, its control, its obedience, and for once it had been denied, not by power, not by threat, but by human courage, morality, and respect for choice. Saren's tears marked a turning point. They were not a sign of weakness. They were proof of something stronger than any law, stronger than any council, stronger than any threat. The quiet, stubborn, unstoppable strength of humanity. The twin suns of Caldera 9 rose together, painting the plains in soft gold and pale orange. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying the faint smell of earth and distant flowers. Life on the ranch moved at its own pace, steady and patient, much like Elias Ward himself. Elias and Saren Ale had settled into a rhythm that was both simple and profound. The days began with work, repairing fences, tending to grazers, checking the water recycler, and nurturing the small vegetable garden that stubbornly survived in the dry soil. But the work was no longer lonely. Saren helped willingly, moving with quiet competence, learning quickly, and sometimes offering solutions that surprised even Elias. It had been months since the council had arrived, and the galaxy's attention had faded, but the lessons remained. Saren had learned to ride the grazers across the plains, to handle the tools, and to navigate the machines that powered the ranch. Elias, in turn, had learned that she brought more than curiosity and adaptability. She brought perspective, patience, and insight. Together, they were stronger than the sum of their parts. One morning, as Elias repaired the solar collector on the roof, Saren brought him a mug of hot tea. She handed it to him silently, and he accepted it with a small smile. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You do not need to thank me," she replied, her voice calm but warm. "I choose to do this. I choose this life." Elias looked at her, his eyes soft. "And that is why I respect you. Not because of law, not because of contract, not because of what the galaxy expects, but because you have chosen freely." Saren nodded, understanding fully now what freedom meant. On her home planet and across the galaxy, most beings equated protection with control. Authority was the measure of care, and ownership was the proof of commitment. Humans, Elias had shown her, were different. They could protect without owning, guide without commanding, and love without demanding. The days passed, and news from the galaxy arrived sporadically through encrypted messages and occasional travelers. Most of it concerned trade, exploration, and politics. None of it directly affected Caldera 9. But the stories of the Council's visit and the dollar contract had traveled faster than either Elias or Saren had expected. Some settlers and traders had laughed at the idea of one credit buying a human's protection over an alien noble. Some doubted it, and some were intrigued. Word spread quietly that a human rancher on Caldera 9 had refused to treat an alien as property, had defied the Council, and had preserved freedom where the galaxy expected control. It was not a story of violence or conquest, but one of principle and courage. The ripple effect was subtle at first. A few other humans began to adopt similar practices when dealing with contracts or disputes on frontier worlds. Some alien settlers started to question the norms of ownership and control. And slowly, very slowly, the story of Elias Ward became a quiet legend, a human who valued choice above all else. One afternoon, as Saren walked across the plains to gather herbs for dinner, she stopped and looked at Elias repairing a broken fence post. The sunlight fell on his back, highlighting the dust on his jacket and the roughness of his hands. She felt a deep sense of peace, a sense that she had found not just safety, but a kind of home she had never imagined possible. "You have changed more than my life," she said softly. Elias looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "How so?" "You showed me what humanity can be," she said. "The galaxy expected selfishness, fear, and compliance. You showed patience, courage, and respect for choice. You changed my understanding of everything." Elias nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "Humans are not perfect," he said. "We make mistakes. We are stubborn, emotional, reckless sometimes. But when we act on principle, quietly and without seeking reward, we can make a difference. That difference can be bigger than the galaxy ever imagines." Saren smiled, feeling warmth in her chest. The calm plains, the grazing beasts, the distant mountains, they were no longer just a landscape. They were a testament to human strength, the ability to shape lives through moral courage rather than force. Even the Council eventually took notice, though indirectly. Across the galaxy, news of human behavior on Caldera 9 prompted discussions among scholars, diplomats, and settlers. Some ridiculed it, some dismissed it. But many began to see the value of humans as mediators, protectors, and guides, not because of their technology or weapons, but because of their stubborn commitment to ethical choice. Elias and Saren did not seek recognition. They did not care for titles or accolades. They continued their life quietly, guided by the principle that freedom and choice were worth more than wealth, more than power, more than compliance. The bond between them deepened. It was not the hurried attachment often found in contracts or alliances. It was something slower, stronger, and deeper. They shared laughter, quiet work, and mutual understanding. They debated ideas and solved problems together. They celebrated the small victories of daily life, like fixing a stubborn generator or harvesting the first vegetables of the season. One evening, after the suns had set and the plains were bathed in twilight, Saren stood on the porch and looked out across the ranch. She thought about the galaxy, the council, and the world she had left behind. She thought about all the rules she had been forced to follow, all the expectations that had bound her. And she realized that none of it mattered anymore, not because the galaxy had changed, but because she had. She turned to Elias, who was adjusting a panel on the water recycler. "Do you ever think about how one small act can change so much?" she asked. He paused and looked at her. "All the time," he said. "A dollar, a choice, a refusal to do what is easy. Sometimes that is enough to ripple farther than any law, any council, or any fleet of ships." Saren nodded. She thought about her tears, the council's arrival, and the lessons she had learned. She understood now that courage was not always loud and that strength was not always measured by weapons or authority. It was quiet, steady, patient, and it was human. Over the following months, settlers occasionally visited the ranch, curious about the human who had stood against the galaxy. They expected drama, tension, or punishment. They found instead calm work, kindness, and respect. Children watched Elias and Saren tending the animals and gardens, learning lessons about courage and morality without ever hearing a lecture. One young boy asked, wide-eyed, "Why does he let her choose?" An elder woman answered softly, "Because that is what humans do best. They protect choice, even when the universe demands otherwise." The statement was true. The galaxy began to see humans not just as reckless wanderers, but as beings capable of moral courage that could influence outcomes without force. Years passed. Caldera 9 remained a quiet, dry world, but the story of one credit, one contract, and one human's steadfast morality became a legend whispered across colonies and settlements. It was a story that inspired settlers, diplomats, and even a few council members to rethink the meaning of protection, ownership, and freedom. Elias and Saren continued their life quietly, raising grazers, tending crops, and walking together across the plains. The suns rose and set, the wind moved across the dust, and life continued in steady rhythm. But the small choices they had made, Elias refusing to claim Saren, Saren choosing freely, had rippled farther than they could have imagined. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned gold and purple, Saren turned to Elias. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. He looked out over the plains, the grazers grazing quietly. "No," he said simply. "Even if the galaxy had punished me, even if I had lost everything, I would not regret it, because some things, freedom, choice, respect, are worth more than all the stars." Saren smiled, leaning on his shoulder. "Then I am glad I chose this life," she said softly. And for the first time she felt fully, completely free. On Caldera 9, in the quiet, golden light of twin suns, two lives had intertwined, not through law, not through obligation, not through power, but through principle, choice, and respect. The dollar contract that the galaxy had laughed at had changed not just their lives, but the way humans were seen: stubborn, moral, courageous, and quietly capable of reshaping the stars themselves. The galaxy may have thought it owned people, systems, and lives. But Elias Ward had shown them something far more powerful: that humanity could protect freedom with nothing but moral courage and a simple, steadfast choice. And in that quiet, sunlit world, the legend of the dollar contract was complete.